Two Towers is full of memorable moments, stellar character work, and climactic battles, yet there's still quite a bit of overlooked flaws. If you haven't seen my critique of the near-perfect Fellowship of the Ring, then I'll let you know my standards are pretty simple. Basically, I won't be accepting anything from the books, just the film's continuity. After all, this is a film review and not a review of Tolkien's Legendarium, nor will this be a review of how well it was adapted to the books, as interesting as it is sometimes. And while I love this movie, some of these flaws are pretty silly, and others just hard to overlook. Witch King, take it away.
You would die before your stroke fell.
On the plains of Rohan, Legolas pulls an arrow on Éomer after his racist remarks about Gimli.
I would cut off your head, dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground.
Legolas mistakes a personal insult for physical peril, but his sentimental outburst isn't without consequence. This short-sightedness exposes both his plot armor and his foolish motives.
His actions result in a Mexican standoff, a trope in cinema, but in this case the trope is not justified. You see, in a practical Mexican standoff, a confrontation is presented which no strategy exists for any party to achieve victory. Any party initiating aggression might trigger its own demise. As a result, the parties must maintain strategic tension, which remains unresolved until some outside force or dialogue between parties makes it possible. Clearly, the riders of Rohan have the upper hand here, and it's impractical for them to wait for their leader to be killed before they attack.
And before you say anything, I get what they were going for here. It establishes the deep bonds of companionship between Gimli and Legolas since their first meeting. But Legolas just pulled an extremely hostile action against the leader of 60 men who all have them surrounded by long spears. Men who are on high alert for possible threats to Edoras, and up to this point, still view them as such. Men who may react poorly before anyone has time to speak.
Fool of a took!
Not only did he put his own life at risk, but his friends as well. It only takes one random person to escalate the situation by reacting hastily, and this becomes a bloody frenzy of pokey-stabby mayhem.
We are friends of Rohan, and of Theoden, your king.
Thank God for Aragorn's de-escalation training. I think it was senselessly out of character on Legolas's part, and the film would have had the same effect had he just spoken the line and not drawn his bow.
It looks like he may commit suicide. Suicide is badass.
Then again, maybe the three could have taken all the riders at once. Éomer can't even hold on to his sword.
I've been sent back until my task is done.
Gandalf?
Gandalf?
Yeah, Gandalf. Yes. The last time you saw me, you called me a fool.
That was what they used to call me.
A fool? No, Gandalf.
Gandalf the Grey. That was my name.
Speaking of silly mistakes, let's not forget, when Gandalf reveals himself as the White Wizard, he fails to remember his own name despite meeting with Merry and Pippin just 2 days before this.
You are tracking the footsteps of two young hobbits.
Where are they?
They passed this way the day before yesterday.
Yeah, and I bet his name never came up when they greeted him either.
And that's where the Morgoth, if any drooling idiots, comment.
He was not the same wizard anymore, but resurrected as Gandalf the White.
I'm aware of that. I just find it difficult to believe his name hadn't come up in the 2 days of meeting with Merry and Pippin, or even Treebeard for that matter.
Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth.
Dude can't remember his own name, yet he can recall the exact events between himself and the Balrog. Merry and Pippin would have likely already had the exact same conversation with him too. It's just a little off from the usual logical consistency of these characters, and mostly I just find it funny. I'm sure this was put in place for the sake of the audience, but even considering that, it's repetitive because there was already enough exposition to explain how Gandalf changed.
I am Saruman. Rather Saruman as he should have been.
You fell.
Darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time. But it was not the end.
I felt life in me again.
I've been sent back until my task is done. I am Gandalf the White.
Ooh, I don't think you could say that anymore.
Later in the film, Faramir captures Sam, Frodo, and Gollum, and after some time, drags them along to defend Osgiliath. Faramir has the intent of,
take them to my father. Tell him Faramir sends a mighty gift. A weapon that will change our fortunes in this war.
During the battle, Frodo feels afflicted because
His eye is almost on me.
And Frodo is somehow possessed to deliver the ring to Nazgul. Luckily, Frodo is saved by the quick actions of Sam and Faramir, yet still bewitched by Sauron, Frodo puts his sword Sting to Sam's throat.
Wait. Did Faramir not disarm Frodo?
Look.
Did he give him back his blade? He was a prisoner. Why on Middle-earth would he still have his blade if they were planning on delivering Frodo and the ring to Denethor? It's a mighty risk to arm your captives who have all the motives to sabotage and escape their imprisonment, especially in the chaos of a siege-like battle that they were supposed to leave anyways. As small and stealthy as they are, and with weapons to protect themselves, deserting their captors should be their top priority. Faramir has no reason to trust them with arms.
This goes beyond a simple continuity error because it calls into question a character's competency. To avoid this, the scene could have been executed in a few different ways. For one, they could have mirrored the savage strangling of Deagle when Smeagol was first taken by the ring. Having Frodo attempt to strangle Sam would emphasize how the ring is affecting Frodo in the same way it affected Gollum.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
I guess that would make it a bit difficult for Sam to say,
It's me. It's your Sam.
Oh, the tragedy. But they could have even executed that line during the struggle before he gets a full grip on his throat.
I guess next best and most logical would be just have Frodo use a piece of rubble as a weapon. At least it would fit into the continuity and it wouldn't affect characters. Not only this, but withholding the Hobbit swords until later wouldn't only be logical, but also thematically gratifying. Themes. Yeah, I know, but seeing Faramir return the sword to Frodo when he sets the floppy feet threesome loose would have been another symbolic accent to his freedom.
We understand one another, Frodo Baggins.
Like Gladiator.
Shadow's Nest.
Also, what is this shit about the eyes almost on him? Leading us to believe as he is deafened and becomes possessed that the eye is focused on him and now has some control? I thought the premise was Frodo is tempted to wear or hand over the ring in the presence of a Nazgul because they are calling out to the ring. This is the third time the eye has spotted him, possibly fourth, but not confirmed. What's to stop the eye from continuing to watch him?
You know of what I speak. A great eye, lidless, wreathed in flame. Concealed within his fortress, the Lord of Mordor sees all. His gaze pierces cloud, shadow, earth, and flesh.
Frodo, I think you forgot something else. No, not the ring. Something else that affects you in the presence of a Nazgul? Yes, your Morgul blade wound. It must be divine eye intervention that doesn't affect you anymore. Praise the Lord.
But we all know the most criminal aspect of this plotline is that the hobbits don't get to eat that rabbit. At least Gollum got a bite. During the battle against Wargriders, Aragorn needlessly falls off a cliff. In battle, he is shown wielding his sword on horseback before he is forcibly dismounted by a charging warg. When he rolls over, he is now wielding a knife. As he regains composure, Aragorn is immediately charged by another.
What happened to his sword? Did he drop it? Did he sheath it? How? Why? What purpose is this knife going to provide against the cavalry that a sword isn't?
Ah, yeah. Well, whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
Once the second warg makes contact, Aragorn mounts and rides bitch behind the rider. Instead of using his roided up buck knife to kill the scout, he headbutts him. He is then thrown off again, but this time his hand is caught. Instead of just cutting his hand free and stop his dragging, we see him wave his blade around until he is able to stab the orc in the throat, somehow. I'm not sure how you get from here to there while being dragged, but okay. Probably something you should have did the first time. At this point, he still has the knife in his hand, but when he falls off the cliff, his hand is empty. It disappeared between shots.
A few moments ago.
Did he drop it? Did he sheath it? How?
And now that I think about it, the orc's weapon disappeared in this confrontation as well. It definitely would have killed Aragorn in this shot. Ignoring how Aragorn got away from the warg once on screen again and Lady Horsaruwen is finished tonguing the back of his throat, we see Aragorn has his sword in his sheath.
So this just begs the question, since he did have his sword the whole time, why the hell did he have a knife out? It seems a long-bladed weapon would have been far more advantageous against large-scale beasts than riders.
If I was a screenwriter, the way I would solve it is that before the battle started, he would have a spear as his main weapon.
Yeah.
So his sword doesn't even get out of the sheath. Which would even make sense as far as authenticity and realism goes. I don't know if it goes against
well,
the
yeah, a
book,
lot of those cavalry would have spears, and they could give him one.
To translate it to modern day combat, spears are rifles, swords are pistols.
And daggers are the late night Wolverine key fist.
Something was definitely cut. Something had to be cut in that scene. Why on God's green flat earth would he have a hunting knife out against a cavalry of Wargriders? This and the fact that he ignored to use the dagger to cut his bonds free or take down the orc rider is a bit flawed. Albeit easy to miss, it's kind of hard to overlook once it's presented.
You are the luckiest, the canniest, and the most reckless man I ever knew.
Legolas then finds Aragorn's necklace in the hands of the defeated orc, but it would have made more cohesive sense had he found his hunting knife. I guess this object was probably more recognized by the audience, so they had him tear it off Aragorn's neck. The disappearing knife later returns in the Battle of Helm's Deep, a topic I will be deeply covering in this video.
Oh yes, lovely. And look, more.
There was also a wealth of other continuity errors, too many of the show, but here's some of the most silly and interesting. From what he can analyze from the Hobbit tracks, Aragorn retells the battle from their perspective.
They crawled. Their hands were bound.
Except in the previous shot, they're not. Then they're bound again in the next frame.
Their bonds were cut.
A wizard did it.
I see, all right.
Legolas's eyes change color more often than a traffic light. Let's go!
Who the best out here? I don't give a fuck and I don't fucking care.
Gandalf's staff has an illusionary trick to it. Either that or he's waving it around a lot.
You would not part an old man from his walking stick.
Here the staff is carried up. Now it's down. Now it's up again. And down.
Stop. I told you to take the wizard's staff.
How did he miss that anyways? Doesn't really break anything, but goddamn does it bother me. Next up, barrels appear behind the hobbits in this scene, but when Faramir walks in, they're gone. Poof. Praise be the prophet who could turn wine into cheese.
Wizard.
Yeah, and I realize these shots just depict a summary of events and not portrayals of reality. Honestly, I only put these in the video because I find them interesting. And now that we got all this junk out of the way, let's get down and dirty.
Fell deeds awake.
Now for wrath, now for ruin, and the Red Dawn!
Alas, that these evil days should be mine, that I should live to critique Helm's Deep and the Battle of the Hornburg, that I should question the very continuity, tactics, and logical progression of my favorite battle in cinematic history.
How did it come to this?
The Battle of Helm's Deep took 120 days to film, reaching 40 minutes in the extended edition, making it the longest and most complicated battle ever filmed.
Oh, I get it. Don't be hasty.
There were 20,000 extras used in the making, and even the rain was real, as it rained 90 nights during filmmaking. Which is pretty impressive. They had to make that establishing shot of falling rain using water cannons to fit the raining continuity we see later in battle. The Hornburg itself is a small stone fortress consisting of 2 walls protecting the outer and the inner courtyards. Protecting the outer courtyard are steep walls, a narrow causeway, and front gate. At the top is the burg's halls, and running perpendicular is the deeping wall, which protects the valley between fortress and mountain. This valley is known as Helm's Deep. Let's talk about what the deeping wall is actually protecting. In the books, the deeping wall protected the caves, where Rohan's women, children, and elderly hid during the battle, along with their food, their water source, and other provisions. Stuff that would be pretty important during a siege. I only mention this because this is why taking Helm's Deep is so important to Saruman. It basically traps them.
Me so hungry.
In the film, the caves seem to be established as part of the fortress, demonstrating carved stones and entranceway, which I later identified as being here, inside the burg, and indicated even more so when the orcs begin to batter down the gates of the Great Hall. The civilians in the cave hear this and begin to panic. Therefore, the only real estate this wall is protecting is a steep staircase that leads to the fortress's rear gate, which is pretty important. It's a possible escape route between Burg and Helm's Deep, and I'll get more into that in a minute. As for the enemy, well...
It is an army bred for a single purpose, to destroy the world of men.
And yeah, the orcs were heavily armored and were equipped with pikes, swords, crossbows, ladders, and the flames of Orthanc.
Alright, shut up already. You established enough of the battlefield. Let's get into the action. For the deeping wall itself, the archers were far too compact. They're bumping into each other before the battle even starts. Even worse, the overcrowdedness causes a domino effect, knocking those behind them off the wall when shot with crossbow fire. Yes, they had to prepare for the ladders, but Gimli has the right idea.
70! 80!
Watch out for those arrows though, hero. It would have made more sense to keep more forces grounded and rotate them from both sides as they become tired, slain, or run out of munitions. As a result, arming the wall so heavily left the fortress disproportionately prepared for this siege. As you can see at the main gate, they're using rocks and a few spears to defend against the turtling orc soldiers breaking down the gate. Completely inadequate for the task at hand. It would have been more effective to pour Eowyn's piping hot stew on them.
It isn't much, but it's hot.
Is there no other way?
In fact, boiling oil was pretty standard in castle defense. They probably didn't have oil, but boiling water or hot coals probably would have been enough to defend this gate. They could have even had the women maintaining the fires.
Keep in mind what this main gate is protecting. The elves do offer some crossfire from the deeping wall staircase, but they quickly give up on this. Protecting the main gate should have been Theoden's highest priority because of what's inside of it. But not only that, if the deepened wall is overtaken and the burg is about to be breached, they can still retreat into the caves where presumably there's tighter quarters. The orcs' numbers would then be bottlenecked and Rohan could fight less orcs at a time while the civilians have time to escape. But instead, the burg is effectively prepped defenseless for this assault.
These are Uruk Hai. Their armor is thick and their shields broad.
There was so much emphasis on the Uruk Hai armor, but it was poorly visualized. Yeah, it existed, but the arrows pierced right through plate armor over mail. While the possibility is highly debatable between historians, depending on the bow, the arrow, or the plate armor, this execution breaks some tension that was already established in the build-up. Why stress so much on armor if it can't even mitigate damage from an elbow? Then we get to the fires of Orthanc. Orcs load 2 explosives into the culvert, and Legolas is tasked with stopping the Orc Olympic torch runner. Legolas, being established to make perfect shots to bring down his enemy, can't bring down a naked berserker with 2.
Wait. You mean this guy? This guy here. This guy right here. This sharpshooter here.
Bring your pretty face to my eyes.
For the sake of the red eye, come on.
The idea that this needed to be in the film is nonsensical anyways. There are dozens of orcs with torches already around. In fact, there's some with torches just outside the culvert when the bombs are planted. If one orc, or even all of them, casually tossing their torches into the culvert is a little anticlimactic, you could increase the stakes by having a torch relayed to the wall, where Legolas drops the orc carrying the magic torch, but another picks it up, and this happens again and again, but the overwhelming number of orcs are just too much for him to keep up with. At least it would be consistent within Legolas' capabilities. Also, why the hell is the grate of the culvert on the inside? One would want the grate keeping the enemy out of the culvert, eliminating any place for the enemy to hide and focus attacks trying to get through. You know, it's interesting that the runoff from the mountain and valley doesn't have a heavier stream flowing through this culvert. Especially in the, torrential downpour of rain that's happening.
Maybe the water also went to hide in the castle?
Oh, I guess it does look pretty clogged. Well, hell, in that case, the orcs were just doing their plumbers a favor. Maybe that's why they're fighting.
They took our jobs!
Actually, I brought this up because I thought it was kind of neat. Sort of like a neat pick. One of so many in this trilogy. This is something that I've overlooked for decades, despite the film going out of its way to jam it down our throats. It's either a coincidence or somebody really cared in this part of the production because it's a merit to the film's continuity and narrative. I realize I'm gushing over a pipe in the wall, but without this shot of a dammed up culvert, the inconsistency of water levels would portray a drain with no functional purpose being there, and this would come off as a mere plot convenience. It's actually quite flooded on the inside, and you can see just the top of the water is barely flowing, which would be why there's barely a trickle on the other side. One could even call this a great execution.
Boo this man!
Once the wall was breached, the men and elves on the other side should have led a fighting retreat up the stairway of the Hornburg. Instead of pulling archers to higher walls, he keeps them on the ground within melee range. At this point, the Valley of Helm's Deep is lost. There's nothing to defend except the stairway. They did what they could to defend it, and they should cut their losses. His volley does little to halt the wave of Uruks crashing through the gaping hole, and Aragorn orders a charge to plug the gap long after they've gotten through. Because of the abrupt explosion, there would be no way to wedge a tampon in time. As you can see, the orcs even have time to set up a pike wall inside Helm's Deep. I'm not sure why he thought this was a good idea. His forces outnumbered more than 33 to 1. Instead of regrouping through the rear gate to higher ground, the elves die arbitrarily. Except Legolas.
But he had to save Gimli.
Yeah, he sent all the elves to slaughter because of this idiot. Gimli jumps off the wall ass first into pikemen.
Oh, that's a true friend, buddy.
Ignoring the fact he didn't get a rusty poker up his ass, he would have been well surrounded by the time Aragorn's charge got to him, with even more rushing in from behind. He landed about here. I guess Legolas does a thing that helps out in the middle of this.
Wait a minute. Isn't that his arm? Oh, now it's Aragorn's for some reason. Okay. Also, did anyone give a shit when Haldir died? Well, apparently Aragorn did, because after that, he swan dives off the front of the Deeping Wall, alone, after he calls the retreat too late. I guess Haldir did touch him on the shoulders once. He did not want that hug. That was an unconsensual hug.
Sexual harassment.
Anyways, my point is that he's completely screwed now. There's no way getting back inside through either the main gate or the breach that is inside the Deeping Wall. Oh look, he's back. Even Legolas gets his arrows back from earlier. And now he's over here. That was easy. Helm's Deep has but one weakness. Its front gate.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
Ignoring the fact Gimli is tossed like a steak sandwich.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
He and Aragorn intercept the siegers on the causeway, successfully buying the men some time to reinforce the gate. There's that elbow again. It actually frees both Aragorn and Gimli, and they're saved by a rope. Even accepting the weak armor and Legolas arriving just in the nick of time, their escape is a little implausible. Just because they're out of reach of their swords doesn't mean they're safe from danger. The orcs had crossbows at the front gate. Once the main gate was eventually battered down because of its poor defenses, both courtyards are taken. This is because the archway to the inner courtyard also did not have a gate. Placement of a barricade could have slowed down the orcs long enough for the archers on the walls to regroup in the inner courtyard and fight from another fortified position. The soldiers down below in the outer courtyard could then regroup in the caves. At that point, only the tallest ladders would have been useful on the fortress's towering walls, but the Uruk Hai forces would still be bottlenecked at the inner courtyard. Not only do they lose both courtyards, but they also abandon the caves. As mentioned before, this is where all their people are hiding and everything they need to survive during a siege.
Take it to the caves.
Which is sadly why I think the Hornburg and its main gate was so underdefended in this fight. You lose the front gate, you lose everything.
Send forth the women. I want to claim my sandwiches.
This is likely why Theoden, my favorite character, felt so hopeless at the end.
So much death.
But it was all for naught because in a last-ditch effort, Aragorn and Theoden lead a double-filed cavalry charge from the center of the Hornburg to the end of the causeway with little to no resistance. Hell, if it was that easy, why didn't you lead with that?
I'm gonna pour one out for my homies.
These are some impressive beasts. It would be real unfortunate if the orcs wounded the horses and dismounted the riders. Sword, arrow, and pike are all effective weapons against stallions. Look right here. There's a perfect opening to cut these ponies' legs out, and this likely would have been the end of their charge. Instead, the plot-armored horses complete their charge and are met by Gandalf ex Machina.
But aside from that, flanking the enemy with the cavalry with the sun in their eyes, that's damn smart. Just Theoden and Aragorn, they didn't have anything to do with it. As for the orcs, they seem to do everything correctly.
We have two flaws at once. Orcs moving too close and nobody shooting at them.
If anyone's curious why the orcs didn't try bombing the main gate, it's because it's possible they might have also destroyed the causeway. They do have ladders though. They also could have benefited greatly with some other siege equipment like catapults and trebuchets, but the ammo would have likely slowed down their march. I'm also a little confused why Rohan only had 300 soldiers. I know most of the men were banished to the east and spread thin, but did Theoden not have any soldiers in Helm's Deep already? It would have been a real tragedy had they arrived and the entire fortress had already been captured by Saruman.
Stay out of the forest! Keep away from the trees!
I think this line would have been better spoken by Gandalf. Éomer doesn't really have a reason to suspect the trees have awakened, but Gandalf certainly does, as he was just there.
A great power has been sleeping here for many long years.
Also, this isn't Éomer.
Final count, 42.
42?
I don't know who was in charge of the math on this, but that's clearly more than 42.
That still only counts as one!
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the...
Excuse me.
Yes?
How do orcs know what a menu is?
How did you get this number? This is one of the most common and infuriating criticisms where people tickle the idea that Mordor is full of restaurants. The orcs function within an army. Within that army are duties, and most armies have cooks. Somebody has to have the duty of preparing meals and rations for these child soldiers. There may even be a daily or weekly menu of what's being prepared for the troops, much like a cafeteria schedule. Who knows? Friday through Sunday, maggoty bread. Monday, man flesh. It's not unrealistic that a systematic feed regiment be in place for orcs depending on their rank, status, and duties.
Man-flesh Monday. That sounds glorious.
And let's not forget,
They were elves once.
Oh. How does Gimli know what a nervous system is? Did he take an anatomy class while he was down in the mines?
I imagine he learned this from his own fighting, hunting, and killing. You kill or dismember something and its nerves twitch, regardless if its body's still intact.
Just try this at home with a chicken. If one can't understand that, then it's probably because their brain is still comprehending its own stupidity.
Oh yeah, you make a good point there. Thanks for watching this video, and be a dear and give this a like. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. This creator works very hard, and he's an up-and-comer. So, help dear old Dan out. Thanks.
There is a fell voice on the air.
I made a terrible mistake.
Now for the big question.
Where was Gondor when the Westfall fell?
No, God no, not that. It's, how do these flaws tally up against the film's quality? Well, there's obviously a lot of small things that don't really matter, and a few major things, especially in Helm's Deep. Is it a masterpiece? Well, no, but it's probably the closest thing we'll get in a fantasy series. I'll let you decide. I feel like my own bias will just get in the way at this point, and after all,
by rights, we shouldn't even be here.
It's like in the great stories.
The ones that really mattered.
Full of darkness and danger they were.
And sometimes you didn't want to know the end.
Because how could the end be happy?
How could the world go back to the way it was?
When so much bad happened. But in the end, it's only a passing thing.
This shadow.
Even darkness must pass.
A new day will come.
And when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer.
Those were the stories that stayed with you.
That meant something.
Even if you were too small to understand why.
But I think I do understand.
I know now.
Folk in those stories
had lots of chances of turning back.
Only they didn't.
They kept going.
Because they were holding on to something.
What are we holding on to?
That there's some good in this world. And it's worth fighting for.
And it's worth fighting for.
And it's worth fighting for.
Boromir, are you seeing this?
Life is good.
I really approach this video with a lot of care, and I do my best to provide solid evidence. I know there was many tactical as well as narrative flaws in this series, but I enjoy these types of discussions. The videos are just a fun way to start them and put my arguments into an easily digestible format. I'll still be covering my bloodiest critique yet with Return of the King, and likely doing some Rings of Power stuff. I appreciate everyone that made it this far, and until next time, be critical, stay excellent.